Snow fell like a silent storm, covering every inch of Chicago in a thick, icy blanket. Streetlights flickered like dying stars, their orange glow barely lighting the sidewalks. The wind roared between the tall buildings like a ghost screaming through the city. It wasn't just cold, it was cruel. On the corner of 5th and Monroe, near a closed-down diner with boarded-up windows, sat a small figure, barely noticeable, like a forgotten doll left in the snow. It was Lily, just 8 years old, with tangled blonde hair, cheeks as red as cherries from the wind, and lips trembling from the cold. Her coat was far too thin for winter, more of a sweater, really. One of her shoes had a torn sole, the other was soaked through. Her tiny fingers wrapped around her knees had turned a painful shade of purple. She didn't belong in this night. She should have been home, watching cartoons with a mug of hot cocoa, wrapped in a warm blanket, her mother tucking her in. But there was no home anymore, and no one was coming. Cars drove past, their tires hissing over the slush. People walked by, couples laughing, men in suits on phones, women pulling their coats tighter. Some glanced in her direction, but none stopped. None dared. Maybe they didn't see her. Maybe they didn't want to. Lily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. But they kept coming. Her body shook violently with every gust of wind, but she stayed there, afraid to move, afraid of what waited in the alleys or behind the dumpsters where she usually tried to sleep. She had been alone for 3 nights now. The last place she had stayed, an abandoned bus shelter, had been taken over by older kids. She had tried to hide, but they yelled at her, calling her names she didn't understand. She had run barefoot through the snow to escape. Now, sitting in front of a closed store, surrounded by cold and silence, she rocked back and forth, whispering, "Don't cry, don't cry. You're strong, Lily, you're strong." But her voice cracked. She remembered her mom's voice, warm and gentle. "Everything will be okay, baby, just hold on." That voice was gone now, taken by the same night that took her mother away. She pressed her face into her knees to block the wind, but it still bit at her. Each breath came out in a puff of white steam, and each one hurt a little more. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed down the street. A car horn. Lily jumped. Her heart raced. She looked around but saw nothing, just the long, empty road covered in snow and shadows creeping along the walls. She was terrified, but she was more afraid of falling asleep, because every time she closed her eyes, the cold got stronger. Her fingers felt like they didn't belong to her anymore, numb, lifeless, and her lips had stopped moving even when she tried to whisper. She thought of her mother's face again, smiling in the summer, holding her hand while they walked through the park. That memory was her only warmth. She clung to it. The snow kept falling, thick, heavy, endless, and the city, wrapped in glass and steel, didn't even notice that a little girl was slowly slipping away. Lily curled tighter. Her teeth chattered. Her skin burned. Her eyelids began to droop. She didn't want to sleep. She didn't want to die. But she was tired, so tired. And just when she felt herself fading, when the world began to blur into white and silence, a pair of headlights cut through the snow. A car slowed. Brakes hissed. A door opened. But Lily didn't see it, not yet. The cold had taken too much. She whispered one last time, barely audible. "Please, someone, please." And then everything went dark. Snow whipped sideways as the wind cut harder through the empty streets. Traffic had thinned. The night had grown colder. Most people were home, behind locked doors, warm lights, and steaming cups of tea. But not everyone. A sleek black luxury car, a Bentley, glided silently around the corner. Its windows were tinted, its body polished to a mirror shine. It looked like it belonged to another world, untouched by cold, untouched by pain. Inside sat Daniel Cross, a man who owned empires but lived in silence. He was tall, dressed in a tailored black overcoat and Italian leather gloves. His eyes, gray like steel, scanned his phone absently as his driver turned the wheel with smooth control. They had just left a five-star restaurant where Daniel had shaken hands with investors and pretended to smile. He had tasted food that cost more than some people made in a week, but everything still felt flavorless. The applause, the praise, the flashing cameras, it all bounced off him. Daniel Cross was a billionaire, yes, but he was also deeply, painfully alone. He glanced out the window, not expecting to see anything, and then he saw her. A child? Curled up in a ball just a few feet from a trash bin, her face buried in her knees, snow covering her back like a shroud. Daniel blinked. At first, he thought it was a pile of old clothes someone had dumped, but something inside him made him look again. There was movement, a tiny shiver, a flicker of breath. His chest tightened. "Stop the car," he said sharply. The driver looked up in the mirror. "Sir, we're not in the best neighborhood. I suggest—" "I said stop," Daniel repeated, his voice like ice. The car slid to a halt at the curb. Without waiting, Daniel opened the door and stepped into the snow. The wind hit him hard, but he didn't flinch, his eyes locked on the little figure. As he approached, the cold bit through his gloves, but he barely noticed. The girl didn't move. She was too weak. He knelt beside her slowly, careful not to startle her. The closer he got, the more he could see, her chapped lips, her red eyes, the trembling of her thin shoulders. His heart dropped. She was just a child. He spoke softly, almost like a whisper, as if trying to wake someone from a dream without scaring them. "Hey," he said, "are you okay?" The girl flinched. Her eyes opened wide, blue, frightened, filled with tears and frost. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, hoarsely, she whispered, I'm fine." But she wasn't, and they both knew it. Daniel looked at her, truly looked, and something inside him cracked. Her face. It reminded him of someone he had tried to forget. She looked like his sister, the one he had lost in the winter of '98, the one who froze before help ever came. A memory stabbed his heart. He shoved it down. He reached into his coat and pulled out his scarf, gently wrapping it around the girl's shoulders. "My name is Daniel," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." The girl stared, unsure whether to trust him. Strangers had never been kind before. Why would one dressed in silk and gold care about someone like her? "I'm Lily," she said, her voice barely more than air. Daniel gave a slow nod, his breath rising in a cloud. "Well, Lily," he said, voice soft but firm, "you can't stay out here, it's too cold. Come with me. We'll get you warm." Behind him, his driver stepped out nervously. "Sir, I really must advise against—" "Get the heat running," Daniel said sharply, "and clear the back seat now." The driver hesitated, then obeyed. Daniel gently extended his hand. Lily looked at it. She hesitated. Her small hand hovered in the air. She didn't know what to believe. But in his eyes, she didn't see cruelty. She didn't see fear. She saw something else, something she hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. Slowly, she placed her freezing fingers into his gloved palm. And for the first time that night, warmth returned, not just to her skin, but to her soul. Daniel wrapped his coat around her and lifted her into his arms. As they walked to the car, Lily rested her head against his shoulder. The cold still howled, but she didn't hear it anymore. She felt safe. And Daniel? He felt something he hadn't in a very long time. Purpose. The car's interior filled with warm air as the heater hummed softly, melting the frost off the windows. The scent of leather and cedar lingered in the cabin, and the silence between the man and the little girl felt both heavy and delicate, like a snowflake resting on a thread. Daniel gently placed Lily on the plush leather seat, then slid in beside her, closing the door to the bitter cold outside. The driver sat tensely in the front, unsure what to make of what was happening, but he said nothing. Lily sat curled in the corner of the seat like a frightened kitten. Her arms hugged herself. Her lips were trembling, but not just from the cold anymore. She was scared, unsure, confused. Daniel looked over at her. She was shaking uncontrollably. Her skin was pale, her eyes glassy. He could tell she hadn't eaten in days. Her small body had almost no strength left. Still, She didn't cry. Not now. She'd already used up all her tears. He reached out slowly as one might reach toward a stray dog, afraid it might bolt. "Lily," he said softly, "where's your mom or dad?" She looked at him, her eyes wide and haunted. She hesitated, then whispered so quietly he had to lean in to hear. I don't know, I think they're gone." The words fell like snow, quiet, soft, and heartbreaking. Daniel's chest tightened. He saw her eyes, and it felt like he was looking through a window into a world he once knew all too well. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "Do you have anyone? Family? A place to go?" Lily shook her head slowly. "I had an aunt, but she moved. I don't know where, I ran out of places." Her voice cracked and she looked down, ashamed. Then her tone grew urgent, fearful. "Please don't call the police," she whispered. "They'll take me away. They'll put me in one of those places. I don't want to go. I'll run again. I promise I won't bother you." She turned her face away, preparing herself for the rejection she had learned to expect from adults. She waited for the door to open, for him to shove her back into the night. Her little fingers gripped the edge of the seat, like it was the last safe place in the world. But the door didn't open. Instead, Daniel sat still for a long moment. The hum of the car, the ticking of the dashboard clock, the storm outside, it all faded. Something stirred deep within him, a memory, a feeling, a frozen night from his childhood, a sister's hand slipping from his in the snow, the sound of silence when no one came to help. He blinked hard, and then, with a voice full of calm strength, like warm fire melting ice, he leaned in close and said, "I won't leave you." Lily's head turned. Her eyes met his. She had heard many things from strangers. "Keep moving." "Go away." "Not my problem." But never that. "Never. I won't leave you." She blinked, not believing him at first. Her lips trembled again. "Really?" she whispered. Daniel gave a small nod and reached into his coat. Without hesitation, he peeled it off and wrapped it around her small shoulders. The coat was big and heavy, nearly swallowing her whole. But it was warm. So warm. She clutched it tightly, her fingers sinking into the fabric. It smelled like him, clean, crisp, safe. Then gently, he reached beneath her and lifted her into his arms. She was weightless, like a feather made of ice. As he held her, she instinctively curled into his chest, resting her head under his chin. For the first time in days, her body relaxed. For the first time in weeks, her heart slowed. And for the first time in months, she believed she mattered. Daniel cradled her like something sacred, something that couldn't be broken again. He looked down at her and whispered once more, "You're safe now, Lily, I promise. No one's taking you away." And she believed him. The driver glanced in the mirror, stunned by the scene unfolding behind him. Daniel's voice was different, not the voice of a billionaire, not a CEO. It was the voice of a man who had found a reason to care again. As the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the snowy night, the city behind them carried on, loud, cold, distracted. But in the back seat of that black car, a small girl had found warmth, and a man who had everything had just found something more, someone to protect. The black car rolled through the city's sleeping streets, snowflakes still falling gently like tiny secrets from the sky. Inside, the warmth continued to build, not just from the heater but from something invisible, something that passed silently between a broken girl and a man who had long stopped feeling. Lily leaned against Daniel's chest the entire drive. Her small fingers held onto his coat like it was a lifeline. Her eyes fluttered shut, not from fear, but from exhaustion. For once, she wasn't afraid to fall asleep. The car climbed a long private road and came to a stop in front of a mansion that looked like something out of a storybook. Tall windows, warm lights, tall hedges, and elegant stone walls dusted with snow. It was beautiful. It was also quiet. Daniel carried Lily inside. The house greeted them with silence. No voices, no laughter, just the soft echo of their footsteps on the marble floor. The living room was large and glowing with soft golden lights. Art lined the walls. Shelves stacked with first editions stood proudly. There was a grand piano in the corner, untouched for years. Everything was clean, perfect. But it all felt empty, because money can fill a house but not a heart. Daniel brought her to the guest room, a space with high ceilings, thick curtains, and a bed as soft as clouds. He laid her down gently, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Her eyes opened briefly, unsure if she was dreaming. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Sleep. We'll talk tomorrow." She gave a faint nod, then closed her eyes. That night, Daniel sat in the hallway outside her room for hours, just in case. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows like hope returning. Lily awoke to something she hadn't felt in weeks: warmth, softness, the smell of breakfast. Daniel sat at the kitchen island, dressed down in a sweater, flipping through the newspaper, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. She stepped in slowly, wearing clothes far too big for her. His assistant had brought them in a hurry, but they were clean, warm, and hers. He stood up. "Hungry?" She nodded. No words, just wide eyes and a quiet stomach. He set a bowl of hot soup in front of her. She ate carefully, almost nervously, like it might disappear if she wasn't quick. "No rush," he said. "There's more." As the days passed, Lily's walls began to crack. She explored slowly, first the living room, then the library. She found a shelf of classic children's books and ran her fingers over the spines like they were gold. Daniel watched her from a distance, never pushing, always nearby. He began to notice the little things, how she would whisper entire conversations between her dolls, how she could tell a story just by looking at a painting, how she asked big questions with a tilt of her head like, "Why do people ignore each other?" Or, "If you're rich, does that mean you're never sad?" Daniel, who had built satellites and spoken at tech summits, found himself speechless. She was brilliant, sharp in ways most adults weren't. Her imagination filled the house with voices and stories it hadn't heard in years. She invented games using scraps of ribbon and spoons. She talked to plants. She gave the grand piano a name, Eleanor, and told Daniel he should start learning to play. And something strange began to happen. Daniel started smiling again. He started looking forward to the mornings. He even laughed. One evening, while Lily read a book aloud to her stuffed animal on the couch, Daniel stood in the doorway and watched. Her voice filled the room like music. A memory flashed in his mind, his sister, reading to him when they were children, long before the world turned cold. He blinked back tears. Lily glanced up and noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just remembering something." "You want to sit?" she asked. He hesitated, then walked over and sat beside her. And for the first time in 20 years, someone leaned on his shoulder, not for money, not for power, but for comfort. That night, Daniel walked through his mansion, past the quiet rooms, past the awards, the riches, the museum-grade paintings. He stopped in front of the 2 guest rooms that now had lights on, and he smiled. For years, his home had been filled with things, but now it had Lily. It had laughter. It had stories. And it no longer felt so empty. The days grew quieter inside Daniel's mansion, but louder outside its gates. At first, it was a whisper, then a ripple, then a storm. News spreads fast in a city like Chicago, and when the subject is Daniel Cross, the billionaire CEO of Crosstech Industries, it spreads like wildfire. It started with a blurry photo. Daniel stepping out of his car, coat draped around a small girl's shoulders. Then came footage of Lily peeking out from behind him in a grocery store, clutching his hand. The media smelled drama. "Who is the child with Daniel Cross?" "Mystery girl spotted living in CEO's mansion." Billionaire's shocking secret revealed, a street child? Cameras appeared at the gates. Reporters camped outside the Crosstech building. Headlines buzzed with speculation. Everyone wanted the scoop. Everyone had their opinion. Some were moved, some were curious, but many were cruel. "He's lost it," a rival CEO scoffed on a talk show. "This has to be for PR," a former investor tweeted. That girl's a risk. An orphan? Probably a thief, said one anchor with a smirk. The world, always hungry for gossip, twisted kindness into scandal. Daniel sat in his office, watching the coverage in silence. Lily played with building blocks on the carpet nearby, unaware of the chaos her presence had caused. He muted the TV. He looked down at her. She was laughing, building a crooked tower and naming each block after a planet. And suddenly he didn't care what the world thought, but he remembered what it felt like to be judged, because Daniel hadn't always been rich, or respected, or clean-cut in tailored suits. No, he had once been the child behind the dumpster. He had once been the one people whispered about. The orphan who drifted from foster home to foster home, wearing second-hand clothes and eating government lunches. He had slept in basements. He had lied about having parents so he wouldn't be pitied. He had cried in the dark, just like Lily. But he never told anyone. Not even his closest colleagues knew the truth. As he climbed the corporate ladder, he erased his past like wiping a chalkboard clean. He replaced pain with power, poverty with wealth, loneliness with work. Success was his armor. He built Crosstech from nothing, outworking, outsmarting, outlasting everyone. Every dollar he earned felt like revenge against the world that once looked through him like he was invisible. But with all his money, all his mansions, all his influence, he had never healed. Not really, until he saw Lily. That night in the snow had cracked something open in him. Something he had buried deep beneath board meetings and luxury jets. When he carried her to the car, it was like carrying his younger self. Scared, cold, forgotten. So when people called it a stunt, he said nothing. When they mocked him, he didn't respond. Because they didn't know the truth. Helping Lily wasn't about being a savior. It was about not letting history repeat itself. It was about breaking a cycle of silence. It was about telling the cold world that people matter, whether they live in penthouses or cardboard boxes. Still, the criticism didn't stop. One morning, a news van followed Daniel to the grocery store. As he loaded bags into his trunk, a reporter shouted through the cold air, "Mr. Cross, why are you risking your reputation for a homeless child?" Daniel turned, calm, steady. He looked directly into the lens and said, "Because once I was her." And just like that, the cameras fell silent. The seasons changed. The snow melted. The ice turned to rain, and the bare trees outside Daniel Cross's mansion began to bloom with soft green leaves. And inside that once silent house, something beautiful had grown. Not flowers. Not wealth, not anything money could buy. A family. Months had passed since that freezing night on the sidewalk. Months since Lily, with her torn shoes and hollow eyes, had entered Daniel's life. And now, she laughed freely. She danced barefoot in the hallway to songs only she could hear. She painted wild pictures and taped them all over Daniel's fridge. She named every room in the mansion after planets and fairy tale castles. And Daniel? He had changed too. He took fewer meetings. He worked shorter days. He read bedtime stories again. He smiled more. And then came the day that would change both their lives forever. In a quiet courtroom surrounded by lawyers and social workers, Daniel sat beside Lily. She wore a pale yellow dress and held his hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked over the final documents. "Do you understand what this means, Mr. Cross?" she asked. Daniel smiled, eyes a little glassy. "It means she's not alone anymore." The gavel fell, and just like that, it was official. Daniel Cross had adopted Lily. She leapt into his arms the moment the judge stood up. He caught her and held her close, spinning her gently once, her laughter echoing in the quiet room. He didn't care about the press waiting outside. He didn't care about the headlines or the gossip, because in that moment the billionaire and the orphan were just father and daughter. But the world was still watching. When word broke that Daniel Cross had formally adopted a once homeless child, the media frenzy returned. Only this time, something was different. The story wasn't just scandal anymore. It had heart. Photos of Daniel and Lily walking hand in hand flooded social media. Clips of them baking cookies, playing chess, or visiting a children's hospital together went viral. People didn't just see a CEO anymore. They saw a man with soul. And then came the day of the press conference. It was meant to be about Crosstech's next big innovation. Cameras were set, reporters prepared. The room buzzed with curiosity. But when Daniel walked onto the stage holding Lily's hand, everything changed. The buzz turned to silence. He stood behind the podium, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the crowd. He didn't start with charts or numbers. He didn't pitch a product. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "Thank you for being here," he began. His voice was calm, but strong. "Today was supposed to be about business, about our next big thing. But something bigger happened in my life recently." He looked down at Lily, who smiled shyly up at him. "This is my daughter, Lily." Flashbulbs flickered. He continued. "I didn't rescue Lily," he said slowly. "She rescued me. She reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago, what it means to care, what it means to be human." He paused. "We live in a world where people walk past pain every day. We judge. We look away. We build walls, between rich and poor, between races, between classes. But the truth is, under all of it, we're the same. We all get cold. We all get scared. We all cry when no one's looking." A hush fell over the crowd. "If you see someone suffering," he said, his voice softening, "don't walk away. Don't turn the other way. Don't stay silent. Just whisper the words I once said to her." He turned and looked at Lily, who was now wiping a tear from her cheek. "I won't leave you." The room went still. Even the reporters stopped typing. Even the most cynical editors paused their rolling cameras. And for one powerful moment, there was no race, no wealth, no titles, only truth. Later that evening, the speech played across every channel. It trended online. People cried watching it. Some called their parents. Others volunteered at shelters. A few adopted children of their own. Because sometimes a single act of love changes more than one life. It sends ripples through a frozen world. And in the warmth of their mansion, now filled with laughter, art, and bedtime songs, Lily looked up at her father that night and whispered, "You didn't leave me." Daniel smiled, kissed her forehead, and whispered back, "Never will."